There was a pediatric doctor, and he went to a hospital one day, and there was a large area where all the children who were patients there had their beds, all in the same place. And as he walked in, he noticed all the children, but he said one thing in particular stuck out for him. It was one small little girl. While all the other kids were over here, she was over here by herself, seemingly ostracized from the group. So he went over to the head nurse and he asked her, well, what's going on with this little girl? Why is she over here and everybody else is over here? And she said, well, you see, she really hasn't had anybody come to visit her. Her mom passed away. Her dad rarely shows up. So people get the idea, the kids get the idea that she's nobody important. So they just kind of keep her away. So the doctor heard that. He thought, well, I'm going to do something about that. So he went over to that little girl and he said loudly enough for all the other kids to hear, well, I'm so glad to finally see you. I've been wanting to talk to you so much. And then he leaned into her and he began to talk to her, but in quiet tones that the other kids couldn't hear. And then when he was done, he said, well, now you remember to keep that secret I told you until I come and see you again, okay? And then he walked away. And as he walked away, all the other children came over to that little girl to find out, what in the world was he talking to you about? She was no longer ostracized. She was no longer treated with disdain. She was no longer on her own. She was now refreshed, revived, renewed. That doctor had created for that little girl, for just a moment, a safe place, a refuge, a place where she could be renewed again and experience life again. And it changed her life. A refuge, a safe place. Where do you think we could find a place like that? I want you to turn in your Bibles. As it says, we're in the Psalms. And we're in Psalm 63 today. I'm not going to look at the whole chapter, but part of it. Psalm 63. Now, our series, some are in the Psalms, which is what I'm calling it. I'm just picking different Psalms. We're not going through all 150. Just little ones here at a time, little this one and that one. But what I find in the Psalms is that often and you can see this if you have a book Bible, at the top it often says the name of the guy who wrote it. And sometimes it says the situation in which it was written. Well, we have one of those today. We know who wrote it, and we know the situation in which it was written. Does yours say that? It says David, and then it says when he fled into the desert. Right? That's what it says. So we're going to look at this setting and find out why David was able to find a refuge and a safe place, and first of all, why he needed it, and then how he found it. So, Psalm 63, beginning at verse 1. O God, you are my God. Okay, what's the setting for this? We know the setting. The setting is that David was the king in Jerusalem and he fled into the desert. Why? Because his son, named Absalom, had caused him to flee. When he found out that Absalom's following was greater than David's following, he realized, I got to get out of town because Absalom's going to take over and my life could be threatened. So he headed out to the place where he knew no one would find him. He headed out to the desert. Now, what is a desert like? The desert is a place of heat. There's no food. There's no water. It's not comfortable. It is a dry, dusty, weary land where there's nothing to drink and nothing to eat. that's where David went, because Absalom is chasing after him, is threatening him. Now he's out in the desert, and as a victim of a conspiracy against him, he needs somebody to help him, someone greater than him. Now, why was Absalom doing this to him? Absalom had a half-brother named Amnon and a full sister named Tamar. These were all related to David, obviously. And at one point, Amnon, we're told, attacked Tamar. So Absalom found out about this, and he decided to do something about it. And he got his men to kill or have Amnon killed. Absalom did this to his half-brother. David finds out about this, and Absalom takes off. And he goes to another country, and there he stays in exile for 3 years. So he's in exile for 3 years, and finally people convinced him, you really should let Absalom come back. I don't want to, but you really should. I mean, here's your son. Okay, I'll do it under this condition, that he can come back to Jerusalem, and he can be in Jerusalem, but I don't ever want to see him. He has to stay away from me. I cannot see this kid. He has to stay away all the time. So that went on for about 2 years. And finally, Absalom has had enough of this. I mean, yes, he did something wrong, but he wants to see his dad. So he sent word to David, which said, hey, why did you let me come back here if you weren't going to see me? So either see me or kill me. Well, David said, I don't want to kill him, so I guess I'll see him. And he did. But there's still a resentment in Absalom's heart. There's still that feeling like, Dad did me wrong. Either a resentment or a desire for revenge. And so what he would do, we're told, is he would stand outside the city gates. And as people were coming to the king, as they often did, with complaints, Absalom would intercept them. And he would say, you want to see King David? Yeah, got a complaint? Tell me about it. I'm his son. Okay, and they would tell him. And Absalom would say, well, I know how David is going to rule on this. If I were king, I would give you a better ruling, more favorable ruling. So, I'm just saying, if I was the king, it would be better for you. So this went on for a while, and people are starting to drift away from David and toward Absalom. And he's starting to gather a following, thinking, well, if Absalom is king, it's going to be better for me than if David is king. So his following grows and grows and grows. And then finally, Absalom has his messengers, when he thinks he has enough people who are following him, and he has more followers than King David does. He has his followers send out messages to everyone saying that Absalom, is now the king. David is no longer the king. Well, David finds out about this. What does David do? Well, I think I'm in big trouble here, because I do think Absalom has more people on his side than my side, so it's time for me to get out of town. And that's what he did. He left. Well, where do you go when you want to get away? You go where no one else is. You go out to the desert. And that's where David went. So where is he now as he writes this song? He's in a dry and weary land where there is no water. What a perfect description of a desert. Now, David fears for his life when he's out there. I mean, he doesn't have any food, doesn't have any water, and he's afraid that his sons are going to kill him. So what do you do when you're in a situation like that, and you have a God that you know that you can go to? You cry out to your God. God, I need you. God, I need a refuge. God, I need a safe place. God, I need a sanctuary. Verse 2. I've seen you in the sanctuary and beheld your power and your glory. Because your love is better than life. My lips will glorify you. I will praise you as long as I live. And in your name I will lift up my hands. My soul will be satisfied as with the richest of foods. With singing lips my mouth will praise you. Now, when David was in Jerusalem, he had a place where he could go that was a sanctuary, that was a safe place, that he could get away from the pressures of life and renew himself in the presence of his God. Where was that? In the sanctuary, in the place, in the temple. You know, that place where the priests made the sacrifices, where the Ark of the Covenant was. He could go in there and he would be safe and it would be quiet and he could spend time alone with his God. But now, in the desert, if I only had a place like that. Now I'm out here and it's dry and dirty and dusty and I have no place to go. And I remember that sanctuary where I spent time alone with God. If only I could get away from this place, God, and spend time with you like that. And so he looks into not a physical sanctuary, but a spiritual sanctuary. And what does he see? He sees all the things he's been missing. He says, I see that I'm missing the power, the glory, and the love. As David had been the king, he had those things that went with being the king, the power and the glory. He had the ability to take care of his problems. He had all the resources that he needed to overcome any struggle that was in his way. He had those things as a king in his palace in Jerusalem, and now he's missing all that stuff. Now how do I overcome my problems? I don't have all those resources I had when I was the king. What do I do now? What's the other thing he's missing? He's missing love. Love. His own people, and especially his own son, have threatened to kill him. He is no longer being loved by those he loved. Those he loved have turned against him, but God saw his situation. God still loved him. God would not turn away from him. God would always be there for him. And he could rest, David could, in that promise. And then what's his response? Being in that sanctuary, it's praise to God. God has satisfied that hungry man in the desert. David has found a refuge, a place of safety. Verse 6, on my bed I remember you, I think of you through the watches of the night. David thinks back to those times in the palace when he had been on his bed at night. And as he was thinking and reflecting back on all God had done for him, how God had given him victory so many times, how God had done so many things for him, protected him, taken care of him, provided for him, he thinks back into what it was like as he was lying there on his bed at night, thinking about all that God has done for him. During those dark times, God always protected him, always took care of him, always provided that place of refuge and safety in the dark times. I came across an account by author Gordon MacDonald who writes about a situation with his daughter when she was 5 years old. Listen to this description. Maybe you can relate to it. When our daughter Christy was 5 years old, the room where she slept was a safe place to her, but only if it was carefully arranged before she fell into sleep. I remember her earnest instructions before I would leave her. Her dolls and stuffed animals had to be lined up against the wall in a carefully prescribed order, each one having its nightly turn to be tucked in with her. The window shade had to be lowered to a set point, no lower, no higher. The top sheet had to be folded over the edge of the blanket. And finally, the bedroom door had to be left open just far enough so that it admitted the glow of the nightlight in the hall, but not so that the direct light would shine into her eyes as she slept. The final words as I said goodnight were always, "Daddy, where will you be? And what time are you going to bed?" And after I answered her questions, she would remind me, "Now don't go to sleep before I'm asleep." In her childhood, the bedroom, he says, would be a safe place if all the routines were properly established. And then she would drift off to sleep, comfortably confident that everything was under control and that her mother and dad were nearby to provide protection if it was needed. Parents, can you relate to this at all? We have routines at night with our kids. And these routines give them confidence, give them comfort. They know that their parents are going to be there, that nothing is going to get them in the dark, that they'll be just fine in all of this. And their bedroom, knowing all of that, becomes that place of safety, that place of refuge in the darkness. And that's what David desired from his God. That place of safety, that refuge in the darkness that he was going through right now. David says, my soul clings to you in the midst of my difficulties because I know your strong hand there is behind me. I know you will be with me no matter what, that you're there for me. He says this in verse 7, because you are my help, I sing in the shadow of your wings. My soul clings to you. Your right hand upholds me. Two pictures there that he uses. One is that of a bird. Now, if he's out in the desert, as deserted as it is, there's going to be birds out there. So as he's looking around, he sees birds, and it reminds him of a bird and how God almost acts like a bird does in this sense. He says when there's a bird that has babies, if that baby falls out of the nest, the mother bird will come down underneath, swoop under, and catch that baby in her wings. Keep her from falling. The other thing, too, is if when they're on the nest, if a storm comes up, the mother will spread her wings out and cover the babies. So the mother bird protecting the children. Then he says something about a strong right hand. As a father has a strong right hand. That's how God acts when we're going through difficult times. Reminded me of this. When I was in junior high school age, I started to learn how to ski. I'm talking about snow skiing, down the hill in the winter kind of skiing. And I remember the first time I went out to ski, I had no idea how to ski, never been taught. You just get on these things and you go down the hill. That's what I thought. So there were two hills. There was a advanced hill and there was a beginner hill. And I said, all right, well, I don't want to die, so I'll go on this hill. So I got to the top of the hill and I looked down. I said, well, what can there be to this? You just go down. So I took a deep breath and down I went. And I went really fast because I had no idea there weren't brakes on these things. Until finally I went down so fast I lost my balance and I fell in the snow. I am determined to learn how to ski, but I have no idea how to do it. So how do you learn if you don't know and there's no books right there on the slopes? You look around. Well, how do they do it? What are they doing? So I began to watch, observe, and then I'd go back up to the top and I'd see something that I thought might be the answer and I'd try that and down I went until finally I started to get it a little bit. But one thing I noticed in my observations was for the not my size kids, but little kids, when they were learning how to ski, I saw this one time where a dad and his little boy were about to go down the hill. And the little boy stood there in front of the dad with his skis. And the dad came in behind him and he put his skis around him and his skis, and he put his hand on the little boy's shoulders. Now, dad knows how to ski. Little boy doesn't. But dad said, we got this. So off they went. And I noticed that dad started to guide them going down the hill. As he had his hands on his shoulders, he would move his son in the direction that he needed to go. And they got to the bottom, and they were good. They didn't fall like I did. So they went back up again, and they did it again. And each time, it seemed to me that Dad's grip was a little less and less. Until finally, one time, as they were going all the way down, Dad's grip finally released, and the little boy could ski on his own. But Dad was still there in case he fell. Dad was right behind him. Dad created a place of safety so that he could flourish, so that he could have life in the struggle. Dad was there all the time. Dad created that safe place for his child. But the child knew that Dad would always be there for him. Sometimes we need a place of safety. Sometimes we need a refuge. We don't know how to deal with stuff. We're hurting. We're struggling. How do I get through this? I don't know where to go. What do I do? David says, in the midst of the desert, in the dry and weary land, where there is no water, you can call out to me, and I'll be that place of safety for you. I'll be that refuge for you. We don't have to go through this alone. Jesus, that beautiful name. Jesus, our hope in life and death, provides that refuge for us. When we place our faith in Jesus Christ, when we turn from our sin, when we believe that Jesus died on the cross and rose from the grave, we can have all that in our lives. We can have that place of safety. We can have that refuge in the midst of the struggle, in the midst of the desert, in the midst of the storm. It is ours in Jesus Christ. Where do you need a refuge today? What struggle are you going through right now where you think, I don't know how to deal with this? I need a place of safety. I need to know that God is there. I need to know that God loves me. I know that God will take care of me, that God will be there guiding me with his hands, just being there in case I go down to hold me up. David found it in the midst of the desert. And by the way, the end of the story is, tragically, Absalom died. And David came back to Jerusalem and became king again. That's how the story ended. He was reinstated. He was restored to be king once again in Jerusalem. How do you need restoration? How do you need restoring? How do you need life? How do you need safety? It's time to bring it to God. No matter what we're going through in life, God is that place of refuge for us. So as we close, I want us to think about our situation. I want you to think, what is the situation right now that you need a refuge from God? You need that place of safety in your life. Where is it you need? What is it that you need? And today I want you to come to him and ask him, cry out to him, and receive that from him. Let's do that just for a moment, and then I'll close.